my 5 test tubes.
Yeah, no, and they made a big show of it. And I remember Tony Blair visited Libya and was, and Gaddafi was like, I'm turning over the new leaf. I'm a good guy again now. And then that didn't that. And then we turned on him so quickly after he played the good guy for us to again come up with a totally bullshit, after the fact justification for the Iraq war. I remember at the time, Christopher Hitchens was even going on TV talking about, well, Gaddafi's giving up his weapons of mass destruction program, so it must be working.
Yeah. And, of course, the rest of the world saw that in the context of Saddam Hussein actually had disarmed, and we came there and killed him. He ended up executed. Then Gaddafi surrenders, this rudimentary program, whatever it was. He ends up dead. Not just dead, but sodomized with a bayonet in a ditch. And the rest of the world, of course, saw this and was like, I think we're going to hold on to our nuclear weapons. And actually, North Korea said that specifically at the time and has said it a million times since. We've seen what happens when the United States says, hey, why don't you disarm and we can live together in peace?
Not only
obviously, you're going to end up dead.
Not only that, if you're Iran, look what happens when you even negotiate with America.
Yeah, never make that terrible mistake.
Don't negotiate with terrorists. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
what's interesting about the book is that people did actually talk about that apparently at the White House at the time. If we overthrow Gaddafi, that's going to send the message to the world, never, ever disarm. And they went ahead anyway.
But what about the idea that, if we overthrow Gaddafi, a bad guy or whatever that he is, as we've seen from Iraq, the aftermath of it, or who's going to take over the country? And then lo and behold, it turns into just a cauldron of violence and mayhem.
Yeah. And as I say, she doesn't want to take ownership of that for very good reason.
She really backs away from the Libyan intervention in the book. How does she just says my role in this has been overstated?
Yeah, her role in it has been overstated. It was a very complicated situation. It was difficult to know what the right course of action would have been. And as I say, she just basically takes the position that everything would have been awful. Even if we'd never done anything, it would have been terrible too. So she knows how bad it looks. And she also, in the book, backs away a lot from just sort of the use of force in general by the United States, which is kind of interesting. She wants to tell us that she's been misunderstood and that people think she's the person who wants to bomb everybody for good, when actually, what she really wants is for the United States to, use its power in other ways to do good things. And so it's all, as I say, it's just this 550 pages of sludge.
Well, here's one interesting thing that is in the book that this was in Dexter Filkins' review of the Samantha Power book, and this is quoted by Daniel Larison in the American Conservative. But speaking of the Libyan intervention, Power says of it, and or the rather disastrous aftermath of it, she says here, quote, "We could hardly expect to have a crystal ball when it came to accurately predicting outcomes in places where the culture was not our own," which would seem to imply that she's making a fairly airtight case against intervention. But as Larison points out, this is an argument that it's a heads I win, tails you lose argument, because oftentimes, if you are against U.S. military intervention, the hawks or the liberal interventionists will couch response to that critique of well, how do we know what's going to happen? Do you really think that you can impose American standards of democracy on another country overnight? They'll always say, well, that's sort of a pseudo racist argument that Arab peoples are just not fit for democracy, or insert target of U.S. military action here. But it turns out that you can fall back on the cultural explanation when it doesn't work out, in any case, you can rely on the cultural explanation to support this argument. And she's saying here, we just didn't have a crystal ball, about what, we didn't understand the culture enough to understand what was going to happen.
Yeah, it is incredibly shameless on her part. And just that whole, we didn't have a crystal ball. It is well, we had this very fragile vase in our hands, and we took it and we threw it as hard as we possibly could against the wall, and it shattered. Now, who could have predicted that would happen? We didn't have a crystal ball.
But remember, all of those people I mean, they would have died eventually anyway.
That's the Meghan McArdle argument.
I mean,
imagine 300 years from now.
Yeah. All those people would be dead.
And it's just, as Larison writes here, the truth is that Libyan war supporters weren't concerned about what happened later. That would be someone else's problem. They had their good intervention and they declared that it had worked. And then Libya and its neighbors paid the price for their self-congratulation.
It honestly feels like part of the real motives for the Libya intervention was to basically provide a counterexample to Iraq so that intervention didn't get too deeply discredited by like the American public. That like people were worried about like another Vietnam syndrome kicking in and being like, oh shit, we can't make people just, the last intervention can't have been this catastrophic Iraq thing. What about some like a Rumsfeldian dream thing with just air support, no boots on the ground, but still successful? And then we could tell people, see, this will be the model that we can pitch the next time we need to do one. Is this thing that worked?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that she's part of the wing of the foreign policy establishment, which sees, well, on the one hand, there's bombing countries, and then on the other hand, there's invading countries, and there is no third option. And we have to make sure that people are behind at least one of those two options.
So moving on from the disaster that was the Libyan intervention to the ongoing atrocity and human rights catastrophe that is the war in Yemen. Again, this took place while she was UN ambassador. Like this, started heating up. Like again, like towards the end of the Obama administration, but it was definitely ongoing. Does she have nothing to say at all about that in the book, or like does she bring it up at all?
She has. There are two references to Yemen in the book. In the first, she lists the countries on planet Earth where it's illegal to be gay. There are like 6 of them, and Yemen is one. And then she talks about how the Russian ambassador to the UN, I think, made fun of Yemen's ambassador to the UN for taking the opinions of women seriously. And that's it.
So nothing about what, like the absolute genocide that the Saudis are doing there. Okay, so this is from another review of the book. This is Shireen Al-Adimi in These Times. Brings up this example. While she was UN ambassador, right, in June 2016, Ambassador Power was asked to comment on then UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon's stunning admission that Saudi threats to UN funding led him to remove Saudi Arabia from a list of armies responsible for killing and wounding children. Power and her staff reportedly ignored a journalist's questions about this. Since news broke of Ban's decision, I have asked Power's office for a direct response to Saudi funding threats, journalist Samuel Oakford wrote for Politico in July 2016. Neither she nor her staff ever replied.
Yeah, I mean, and it's even worse than that. Like when the war was beginning in 2015, she actually made remarks at the UN Security Council basically blaming Yemen for what was going on. So now that she's out of office, every now and then she will get like very angry on Twitter and say bad things about Saudi Arabia and the war. But while it was happening, when she was actually in office and could do something, like she did nothing whatsoever. And like this is why like it could have been the world's most interesting book about politics, where she could have said, look, Jeffrey Epstein mostly worked for Saudi Arabia, and he has compromise on 90% of the most powerful people in the United States, and so we can't do anything about it. Or whatever the actual truth is about our relationship with Saudi Arabia, just that we need them to keep on buying our arms in exchange for all of our oil. Like whatever the truth is, maybe it's that like if you disavow your most vile, disgusting ally, then all of your vassal states are going to get nervous and your empire is going to wander off. Like, what is the answer? Like, we don't know because we weren't there, but she was. And sadly, she just doesn't tell us.
I mean, and also like the fact that she, now that she's out of power, is getting on Twitter condemning, Saudi war crimes in Yemen is also incredibly galling, because it's like, not only does she not want, like she just wants to have it always, all the time. And again, it's like to build up this image of the sort of complicated idealist, or like the all the horrible problems that like, American power must face, reasonably and realistically in the world.
Yeah, it really is. Like, as I say, it's just like, it's absolutely shameless on her part. Like, I would like to know if she cares so much about this. Like, maybe she should give the money she got from the Henry Kissinger Prize to Yemen. Like that would be a nice gesture. But I haven't seen anything about that. I mean, and that's the thing about her that is so incredibly distressing. Like, this is like Obama. Like, this is apparently the best that the United States can do, and it is horrendous. It's like, she's somebody who it's not just that she is smart, which she is, and it's not just that she's talented, which she is. It's that she's at a position in her life where in America, in a country like America, she's basically untouchable. Like, she's a tenured professor at Harvard. I believe she has tenure. She's at least a professor at Harvard. Like, she could teach there for the rest of her life and tell the truth, and nothing would happen to her. There would be no affirmative negative consequences for her. People would just withdraw the rewards, so she would never get to be Secretary of State. But it's too important to her, like, to maintain her viability within the system. Like, whatever it was that Bill Clinton said.
What did Bill Clinton say?
Well, when he was explaining, like, he was explaining to a friend when he was in college, or maybe he was at Oxford, like why he was not going to Vietnam, but also trying to get out of the draft. And it was, he was doing all this fancy footwork to maintain his viability in the political system.
And, as you mentioned, like Secretary of State power or Senator power is certainly not something to write off. I mean, like that could very well be in the cards for, all of our futures. I guess like the other thing about her is she is also married to Cass Sunstein, the kind of like pseudo libertarian economist and sort of nudge expert, much beloved by neoliberal technocrats. And here's a little secret to the Chapo audience. In an episode that was lost to an audio disaster, we read Leon Wieseltier's wedding toast to Cass Sunstein and Samantha Power.
Oof.
It is, I mean, fuck. Maybe let's just do it again in a future episode.
We should, because man,
it is one of the most overwrought, most nauseating pieces of just effluent that like you could ever come across.
If you want to get at what it's like to be around these people and the monstrous regard they hold themselves in, it's a really good way to feel that.
I mean, like the long and the short of it, though, is that like Leon's toast to them was basically is like, we are all so privileged to be in this room, to be here at the joining and coming together of like the two most moral best people that America can possibly produce. And like, we have a responsibility to like live up to like what being at this wedding means.
Yeah, well, I would listen to that, except that I think I would rather die of dysentery. Like this, like the book and that kind of thing, like really makes you understand why the Republican elite, the Republican foreign policy elite, but all of them like burn with hatred for the Democratic elite, because, as they pointed out at the time, like, yeah, sure, we tortured people, but Barack Obama would just murder them with drones. And what the Democrats want is to do pretty much the same thing as the Republicans do, but also receive a Nobel Peace Prize and do a photo shoot for Vanity Fair. I mean, it really is unbearable. And it is the kind of thing where, for a brief moment in time, at least for me, I was like, maybe I should vote for Trump.
Like, yeah, you're right about like the hatred that the Republican elites, like, yeah, like, chainsaw Elliot Abrams has for these people, because it's like, it's the old thing. Like, there's no such thing as halfway crooks. Like, how could you possibly, call us evil or look down your nose or like, turn up your nose at us when you're doing the same fucking thing we are?
Yeah. Like
we don't, the only difference is we don't apologize for it. We don't grovel for like, NPR listeners to, respect or like us or at all. We know we're evil. We like being hated, but like, we understand that like, this is power. Like, this is what wielding power means. And we're willing to do it. We just don't want to fucking, a medal for it.
Yeah. The Kissinger is the perfect example of that, because he would go to the White House and he would listen to Nixon get shit-faced and talk about how I don't give a damn about the civilian casualties, Henry.